Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, all of you who are joining us for today's webinar. Thank you for spending some time with us. I'm Derek Miller. I'm the president and CEO of the Salt Lake Chamber and Downtown Alliance. I'm grateful to have some distinguished individuals from our business community who have joined us today. I'm going to let them introduce themselves, our panelists, in just a moment. But I wanted to start with a quick introduction of today's webinar that we've titled The Black Experience in the Corporate World. And as I said, we're grateful to have three distinguished individuals to discuss that, and I'm grateful to be able to serve as the moderator. This is part of a larger effort that is done in partnership between the Utah Black Chamber and the Salt Lake Chamber that we have titled Equality and Inclusion in Opportunity. And this is really a kickoff webinar to a few different forums that we will be having over the next several weeks and months as part of this conversation about equality and inclusion in opportunity. So I want to start by saying, if you're interested, besides this webinar, in being part of that ongoing conversation, you can contact us at policy@slchamber.com. We've already begun to organize and schedule a series of upcoming small group conversations. If you send an email to policy@slchamber.com, you can find out about those and how you can participate. And speaking of our partnership, I want to turn some time over to James Jackson III, who is the Executive Director of the Utah Black Chamber, to also provide his welcome, and then we'll get started with the panel. James, go ahead.
Thank you, Derek, and thank you, everyone. Once again, my name is James Jackson III, founder and executive director of the Utah Black Chamber, and it is an extreme honor and privilege to be partnering with the Salt Lake Chamber to really push the movement forward of eliminating justice and social injustice and racism in the corporate environment. And I'm looking forward to the partnership that we have created with these webinar series and forums going forward to continue the education, collaboration and partnership to how we, as in the Salt Lake and Utah environment, can be more inclusive and welcoming in our business world. So thank you for the opportunity. I turn time over back to you to get the discussion started.
Thank you, James. As I mentioned, we've got three panelists, and of course, James is one of them. Our other two panelists are Emma Houston, who is with Salt Lake County Government Human Resources. She's a training development facilitator. And we've also got Shawn Newell from Industrial Supply, who is the Vice President of Business Development there, and also proudly one of our Chamber President's ambassadors, and has been for a long time. So thank you, all three of you, for joining. As I said, I wanted to give some time for each one of you to introduce yourselves. And I'm going to ask a question in order to kick off that introduction. Shawn, why don't we start with you, and then Emma will go to you, and then James. The question is, just to kick off our conversation, tell us obviously about yourself, tell us about the organization that you represent, and then tell us, as a Black professional, your experience in Utah. And I know all three of you come from different backgrounds. Not all of you are native to Utah, but you find yourselves here now in the professional environment, and we want to hear and learn from your experiences. So Shawn, take it away.
Thank you, Derek, for that introduction. I came to Utah in 1980 as an 18-year-old to play football for the University of Utah, Go Utes. And it allowed me a period of acclimation to the community and the environment that I was in. I came from not a totally different environment, but one where we had a multitude of different cultures and races that all were mingled together. I was part of a busing program as a young child, so I was used to going to spaces where I was a minority. And I kind of developed through that all the way through high school and learned how to somewhat acclimate to my environment. The tough part is trying to assimilate. I work for Industrial Supply. I've been with them for almost 35 years now. in a number of different capacities, mostly in the sales capacity. And it has been a great experience. Industrial Supply is a family-owned business. So when I first started working for them, I had a little hesitance. I thought, wait a minute, this is a family-owned business. I don't know if I'll be able to stay here very long. But very shortly after I began my career there, my then president, who's now our chairman of the board, came to me and asked me what I wanted to do with my life. And just graduating from school, just being newly married, I had no idea what I was going to do. I was 25 years old. And he offered me an opportunity to work for the company. And what he told me was that this would be an opportunity for me to grow as not just an employee, but also as a person. And he created an environment that was very inclusive of a number of different people and genders. And that was one of his biggest goals. And he was very open with me that that was going to be his goal in running his company. You know, the dynamics shift after people leave, and he left to become our chairman of the board. And one of the things that I lost in business was a mentor, someone that I could go to and have a discussion about issues that were coming up or how to do things, you know, because we're constantly learning. None of us know everything. And for me, especially in the community I came from, I did not have a lot of understanding of how business runs and how to navigate the negotiations and the sales and all the other aspects that come along with business. So, you know, I've continually been able to call on him, but not to the same degree that I probably would need. And that's one of the things I experienced here as far as being in businesses in Utah, is that if I'm willing to reach out to some people to be mentors to me, they've had a willingness to do so. I don't know if it was my approach to them or if it was just the fact that I asked them, but it's been a great benefit to me to grow in business here, especially as a Black man, when I'm not really one that people see or think about when they think of, hey, here comes the guy, the business development guy from Industrial Supply in Salt Lake City, and I show up. You know, you see the eyes get a little wide, and they say, well, golly, you know, I didn't know you could be there. And then I have to explain to them that, you know, I am just me. But that I feel blessed that I was able to meet people who have been willing to help me along the way. And I think that's one of the great things. If we delve into our culture here deep enough, we're going to find people that are willing to help and make sure that, you know, you follow a path that is conducive to your growth. And for the most part, that's my experience.
Thank you for sharing that, Shawn. And I know exactly who you're talking about, because he was a mentor for me when I moved back to Utah and worked at the Governor's Office of Economic Development, and Phil was the chairman of the board at the time. So we have that in common. Thank you for sharing that experience. Emma, let's go to you next, and please introduce yourself and tell us about your experience.
Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Emma Houston. I am originally from Texas. I moved here in 1986 with my family for a job transfer from Florida. So Texas, Florida, Utah, I have been here since 1986. I have seen some things change in that time frame. And so I am currently employed with Salt Lake County government. I am the former director of diversity and inclusion with Mayor Jenny Wilson's office. She recently requested my assistance, and I have transferred to the Human Resources Department. And my responsibility is to ensure that inclusion, diversity, equity, and access is available, is understood, is embraced by the 7,000 county employees. So I am the training development facilitator to ensure that that initiative moves forward, that it is housed internally, but is also ripples out throughout the community. And I say that to say that Salt Lake City, the state of Utah, has been embracing and welcoming and inclusive. Although there have been some hiccups along the way, like Shawn has said, when you make those connections, when you meet individuals that have some similarities, but also some differences, you create that circle of influence that you have that's going to help you along the way, that's going to mentor you along the way, that's going to help course correct you along the way as well. So my experience here in the state of Utah has been a positive experience. Not 100% gold star, rainbows, and unicorns, but it has been a powerful experience. I have been placed in opportunities to meet individuals whose paths I would have never crossed. And when I reference that, I'm basically saying in Texas, in Houston, there are thousands of Emma Houstons. There are thousands of Black women. There are thousands of professional Black women. In the state of Utah, depending on your circle of influence, we are a commodity here. We are a rarity here. So when you think about opportunities, when you place yourself in spaces, when you engage in conversations, I have found out that it is beneficial to cross those lines, to have those conversations, to go into places where you normally would not be. And even if you are the only person in that space, you are there for a reason. So I have enjoyed my time here in the state of Utah. I have cross boundaries. I also served as the chair of the MLK Human Rights Committee. I serve on several commissions and boards. I volunteer in the community. So creating that circle of influence, creating your village, understanding that we have to enlarge our territory, to enhance our knowledge, it has been extremely beneficial in my professional growth. I have also started a small business within the state. So there are opportunities here that I have taken advantage of. And I am happy to be in this space today to expand on not only learning from Shawn and James, and also you, Derek, but also to share a little bit of my experience and how I can also help and mentor others, and talk about the opportunities that present themselves. So thank you again for the invitation.
Thank you. And your input is going to be especially welcome because not just your experience, but that you work specifically in the field of human resources. And so you sort of wear both those hats. One question I wanted to ask you, Emma, just as a follow-up to having moved here in 1986, you said,
Yes.
have you seen an increase in diversity in Utah over that time? Is it different today than it was when you moved here 25, 30 years ago?
Oh my gosh, it is so different. So when we first moved to Utah, there would be days, unless you went to church, that you would not see a Black person, a person of color. You would not see that. But what I have seen now is the diversity from all walks of life, the different languages that we speak, the cultures that we have here. There are now days when we will say, when we meet a Black person or a person of color, we say, I don't think we've ever met. Back in '86, we knew everybody. We pretty much knew everyone. But nowadays, the demographics have so greatly changed, which is a good thing. You can see the diversity. You can hear the diversity. You can experience and all of that. So it has greatly changed.
Thank you so much. James, we're going to come to you with the same question.
Yeah, a little bit different from Shawn and Emma's background is I am a native Utahn, believe it or not. Born here in 1980. So I do have some, I'm a little youth here with the rest of this group. So I'm surrounded by wisdom, and I consider these individuals, Shawn and Emma, my mentors here. I lean on them, and I ask them to help me participate in this webinar because I see them as individuals who have made significant influence and impact in the community. I appreciate their efforts. Being born and raised here in Utah, and Derek, to follow up with your question with Emma, yes, it was not very diverse, and I felt like being born and raised in the Black Baptist church here, that's pretty much older than the state of Utah, it took that village to really carry me through to help me become the man that I am, because outside of that church, I was usually the only one in any space, from school, in elementary, then there may be a little speckle of here and there in junior high, then that speckle grew in high school and then larger into college. But you know, through those experiences and challenges, you know, I always had the church to go back to, where I had a surrounding of other Black individuals where I can share my experiences. And you know, we have a good venting session. Did you hear about this? this, or they said this to you, how did you respond? Because I actually grew up, pretty shy and passive and not sure how to respond to the certain questions that became fascinating and curious. When you're in a homogenous environment, a lot of the things that come at you don't need to be insensitive, but mainly just ignorance, and just need to help in that education. And that's why we have individuals like Shawn and Emma here, is that education is key. And so transferring into I've been in the financial industry now for 20 years and starting the Black Chamber. And, we hear about it all the time within the Chamber, people reaching out to us through email, or I get a direct phone call about people transferring here, and they're wondering, is Utah welcoming for me? Is usually the question. Is there a spot for me to get my hair done? Do they have Black churches here? Basically, they just want to know if there's a community, because there's a different perception outside of Utah than what we know what Utah is. We know Utah is welcoming. However, as a very homogenous place, when you step into the workplace and you are the only one or very few, that welcoming is tested over time, and it takes a while to find that you can be your full self in the workplace, and that takes a moment, especially if there's some things that are said that you overhear that's not directed towards you, and then you're like, wow, did I just hear that? And so you kind of take it back and you sit and think about it for a moment, and then so want to just be aware of those opportunities to find ways to share. Like Shawn was saying, have a mentor, whether it's someone that's in leadership, or whether it's an affinity group that you can lean on to kind of share that experience and see how we can bring that to a little bit of light to make it a little more welcoming. But overall, Utah's been great, and as Emma said, we are a welcoming place. And as I mentioned to you, Derek, before in an interview that we had, that Utah's really prime position employees to go to the next level and be an example for the rest of the country.
Well, I hope so. And that's one of the purposes behind this initiative that you and I have started together. You pointed out, James, that your experience is different from Emma and Shawn because they came to Utah as adults. So it was fairly and probably instantaneously obvious to them that this was different from the places they had come from. But I'd be curious to know your experience having grown up here. Was there a certain moment in time, or at what age did you start to sense, hey, I stand out here in Utah amongst my, neighbors and class and friends? Or was that just sort of a gradual thing that dawned on you?
That's a great question, because, when, as a quick example, a few years ago, the National Association of Black Accountants held their regional conference here, and it was over 100 Black executives and CEOs that came in from all over the country into Salt Lake. And I only seen that on TV. And so to be surrounded by that type of influence was really intimidating, but fascinating at the same time. I didn't want them to leave, because I'm not used to seeing that type of leadership, not used to seeing that type of presence here in Salt Lake, where Shawn and Emma may come from, where there, like Emma said, there was a bunch of Emma Houstons. There's a bunch of James Jacksons, but they're all different colors. That's why I always use my suffix, James Jackson III. Try to stand out just a little bit, because my dad is James, my grandfather was a James. So growing up here, I always knew I was different, but I thought that was like everywhere else. Like there's just only going to be this little pocket. There's always going to be that one little Black church that you can go to. But then as I grew up and I started exploring and going out to different states, I was like, wow, Utah has a long way to go as far as diversity.
So I want to ask each one of you a question about a phrase that we hear often. I'm sure you hear it often, especially as you're talking about the experience of Black professionals in Utah. And that phrase is tokenism. And let's come to you, Emma, first on this question. And how would you explain to corporate leaders, especially in your field in human resources, whether it's a supervisor or a colleague or someone that works for you, how would you explain to them that phrase?
So when I look at what tokenism is, by definition, is that someone is doing the minimum amount that they need to do to make sure that they're in compliance with some rule or some regulation. Not that they necessarily believe in the cause, but because they have to check a box. So when you think about what do your policies look like, but let me just go back. What does your marketing materials look like? And when you are marketing to the city of San Francisco that you want to bring some work into our conference into Utah, do we automatically create graphics that give a false sense of what diversity looks like in Utah? Or are we just doing the minimum amount of that and not implementing that in any sustainable structure? So when we're talking about what we're looking at as far as tokenism, I will bring someone in, I will create a diversity council, but I will not give them any power. I will bring someone on my board, they will be at the table, but I will not listen to their input. I am there to show diversity physically, but I am not talking about creating sustainability where tokenism is not even in the conversation. So when you look at tokenism, it's like going to the same individuals to be the voice for the Black community or the Asian community or the Pacific Island community. You're going to that same voice as if we speak for an entire group of people. So tokenism is little effort. It is little effort that I am bringing an individual who represents a demographic that I want to do outreach to or that I want to bring to the table, but I'm really not giving them the power or the leadership to implement any type of change, to change any type of culture, to look at any policies that may be creating disparities among them. I am doing the very minimum when I am placing a person of color out in the front and not having any intent to help them elevate their skills, enhance their skills, bring their voice to the table to amplify their voice. I am doing minimum.
Shawn, let's build upon what Emma said, and let's talk about your experience at Industrial Supply. I don't know this with certainty, but I'm guessing that you're one of a few who are Black professionals in your organization, and I'd just be curious to know what advice would you give to business leaders about how they're making sure that they're appropriately benefiting from the experiences of Black colleagues and employees, but not going so far as Emma described it, that they're engaging in tokenism or maybe even exploiting them.
This is the reason I don't follow Emma, because she's so eloquent in explaining situations. I'm one of two African Americans that are on the executive team at Industrial Supply. One of the things that businesses have to consider is that based on our experiences, we bring different perspectives to the table. And some of these perspectives may not even cross your mind because of your lens versus my lens. And a lot of times the conveyance of that information is diluted because of misunderstanding right off the bat and biases that may exist to not be accepting of those perspectives. But it's critical that you take a deep look and deep dive into the information that people have to provide. And a lot of times the barriers are so big and so deep and so strong that other leaders can't bear themselves to hear what they're hearing, especially coming from the sources that, such as myself and others. And if you can allow yourself to open up your mind and your heart to say, wait a minute, this might make some sense. It might not be the way I think of it, but coming at this angle, maybe I can understand that, hey, this person has some ideas that can be conducive to us bettering our business and getting stronger and finding a different way to reach our customers or a different way to reach our other employees. And that's real critical. And that takes some self, diving. That takes some looking into oneself and saying, why am I creating these barriers? Why am I not listening to what Shawn has to say? Is it because he doesn't know what he's talking about? Or is it just because I don't care to believe that this could be coming from this source? You know, we can be as educated as anybody else, as we all are here, but our credentials are not seen the same as somebody else's credentials in our society. And that's just the truth. And it's a hard thing for us to swallow sometimes. You know, I continue my education all the time. I just got done with a program, executive education program up at the university. I do this to make sure that I can sharpen my blade so that I'm better at what I do, but still yet, it's not always perceived as growth from people outside of my culture. So I have to carry a burden of trying to be stronger than I really should have to be every single day to convey the messages that I need to convey to help my company get better. And dropping some of those barriers and gaining a greater understanding is critical to us being able to participate wholly in what we do.
Thank you. Thanks to both Shawn and Emma for sharing that. In just a second, I want to go to James because he has a unique experience as someone who sees a lot of different organizations in his work with the Utah Black Chamber. But the commonality that I heard with what you said, Emma, and what you said, Shawn, is it's got to be real. You know, you can't ask a question and then not care about the answer, or you can't just, you know, set up something and not, in your words, Emma, not have any power or influence behind it. So both important thoughts. Thank you for sharing them. James, let's go to you because, as I said, you see this play out or manifest itself in a lot of different organizations. And in fact, you do some consulting on this very topic about what organizations ought to be doing. So share with us that expertise.
Yeah, I mean, Emma mentioned earlier about the marketing piece, right? Where you want to show that you care about diversity, so you pull that one or those 2-3 individuals that you have to put on a, you know, whether through your social media or whatever, to try to recruit and look as if you play that part. But then you also have to look at that if you're looking to recruit diversity, you want to make sure that you have an environment that's welcoming for that diversity. There are so many companies that, you know, reach out to the chamber wanting to diversify their talent, and we can introduce them to various Black organizations that have a lot of people that they can look for to put into their company. But if your company is not welcoming to that environment, then a lot of times you're going to get a revolving door of diversity. And so you don't want to just check the box. You want to ensure that you have the system and the policy set up to be welcoming. So it's not just about the stock photo. It's not just about pulling 2 or 3 people to put on your social media to say, I love all people of color or of all diversity. It really digs deeper because we'll be able to check. We'll be able to walk in and know right off the bat whether or not this place is going to be welcoming for me or not. And then we'll find, and you'll find out really quickly of why all of a sudden that your attrition rates within diversity is not is quite high.
Let me follow up on that, James. And you give us 2 or 3 things that, you know, those who are watching today, business leaders, a lot of different industries, a lot of different types of companies who are probably listening to this conversation right now and thinking, oh my gosh, do I do that in my business? You know, am I inadvertently or unintentionally doing some of these things? And so now they may be asking themselves, how do I change that? How can I make sure that I'm not doing things that are just tokenism? And you said something that really intrigued me, James, where you said, you know, somebody could come into that situation and know right off the bat whether or not it's going to be a welcoming, empowering environment. And we may have business leaders who are blind to that. So it may be evident to someone of color coming in, but it may not be evident to the boss. And what should the boss be doing or thinking about so that it is evident to her or him?
Yeah, you know, and honestly, it's intuition within us that we know. We've, you know, being where we are coming in, you know, having our influence of, you know, like I said, Emma and Shawn and so many others within the community, people of color, we just have this intuition where we walk into a place, we just can tell whether or not, just by the presence of you know, we always, it's really difficult to explain like a women's intuition, right? They just know, or mom's intuition, they just know to their child something ain't right. And that's the same thing we feel when we walk into a company. We can say something is not right. And so what I encourage for companies to do, even if you don't have a diverse environment as of yet, and I'll defer to Ms. Emma to expand on this further, you can still have a welcoming and engaging environment, even if you're not diverse. Just because you don't have diverse employees doesn't mean you don't have a welcoming environment for diversity, because all companies had to start somewhere. And that's why, you know, people are immediately ready to jump into, I need to recruit a chief diversity officer, and, you know, start building upon that, which is great. But you have to be sure that that chief diversity officer also has the environment to be sure that he or she can do her job effectively within that organization. And so you got to look at your systems, you got to look at your policies to ensure that you do have the culture set in place, that people do have an understanding that you want to be inclusive, that there's not only training in there, but also just the overall culture itself to make that environment more welcoming.
Thank you for sharing that additional information. Emma, I see you nodding your head yes, so I'm going to turn the mic over to you to share your thoughts.
And absolutely what James has said, but also what Shawn has said, when you walk into a space, and this is a key indicator, whenever I walk into a space and I am not greeted with a good morning, a good afternoon, a good evening, that is my first indication that maybe there is a little, this is not a welcoming space. So just the very courtesy of someone not greeting you sets the tone as to the culture of that organization. But I also notice if someone walks in after me who may not look like me, who may not come from my background, and they are greeted, I am now doing 1 + 1 = 2, and 2 looks like this. So when you think about just some of the basic practices that we have, if you can walk into a space and someone makes eye contact with you and someone greets you, you know right off the bat that that is a culture of welcoming right there. But if that does not happen, that is my test. That Derek, if I walked into your space and someone at the front desk did not say good morning to me, or good afternoon, or good evening, I would hesitate to continue the conversation. So when you think about that welcoming environment, do you walk around your space enough to know that you can speak to your colleagues, you can speak to those that you work with, and you greet everyone in that manner? But that is my first test. And even though you do diversity and inclusion training, or you do implicit bias training, it's one thing to do training and education. It's another thing to help educate people to change their behaviors. That is the key part. I have now received some information. I am going to change my behavior, my words, my deeds, my actions, and I am going to be intentional. It takes work to be intentional, to be inclusive and welcoming. So when you look at all of those things and how it comes to play, is when I walk in the front door, has someone greeted me?
That is a simple but powerful thought. Thank you for sharing it. And thanks also for sharing that thought about being intentional. There's a lot of power and meaning behind that word as well, which is, the way I take that is, we can and need to change. We can and need to improve. We can't just say, this is who I am, it's good enough, and deal with it, but we need to be able to say, I can be intentional about being better. So thank you for sharing that. James, you and I had a conversation a couple of weeks ago when you shared something with me. I want to use this story to transition to our next question. And you and I were just sort of talking about some of the things that we've seen going on in our community and some of the social unrest, and, you know, a timely and important call for more social justice and promoting that and fighting against racism. And then you said something to me, I don't know if you'll even remember saying it, but you said, I think that a lot of my Black colleagues are probably happy right now that we're doing mostly remote working. And I said, why is that? And you said, because they probably just don't want to be asked about this a million times a day, you know, what's happening in the world and what their thoughts are. And like I said, I want to use that to segue to the next question, which is about another concept. So we talked about this phrase of tokenism, and I want to talk about this phrase of racial battle fatigue and what that means and how we can be aware of it. So James, let's go to you first to talk about racial battle fatigue.
Yeah, you know, it's already been within us since we were born, you know, because we were born into the skin color and given the in-home training on what it's like to be Black in America and what to expect, you know, what to expect when you get pulled over, what to expect when you're in school, what to expect when you're in a work environment. That in itself can be exhausting at times. And then you add on top of that the division that America is in. And then on top of that, you add a pandemic. And then on top of that, you add a social injustice, which is really not the icing on the cake, but this is built up over several hundred years within the US of us already knowing what to expect when we walk into a place where we're the only one, constantly educating people, you know, even though like Emma specializes in diversity inclusion and trains companies as well as in Salt Lake County. She specializes in that, but all of us, honestly, people of color, are consistently educating people on how we like to be treated and how we're supposed to be addressed in certain ways, or what are the right words to say. And that in itself can get exhausting at times. And so then you add this up to where the social unrest comes up, and you are not only being asked about what's going on, what does Black Lives Matter mean, but then you hear and you read about the other side, and you know, people yelling out to you, you know, all lives matter, or people yelling out about all these politically and racially charged things are coming at you, and it's very, very, very heavy, which is why when I spoke to you about it's nice for me not to go into the office, for me, just because as someone who's, you know, pretty introverted, I don't want to be asked those questions right now because I'm not sure how to respond. It's overwhelming. It's just a lot going through my brain. And then honestly, with the division that we have in our nation, I don't know who's on my side. I don't know who's really there to support in my efforts, who really wants to be an ally. And then you do have other people that are on the very other side of the spectrum who are rearing and ready to go for a conversation. And there it probably is a good thing. They're saying to themselves, it's probably best that I stay home, because I walk in there into my workspace, I probably will walk out with papers ready to file for my next employment. So it's a very heavy situation, but you know, June, I mean, I think I sent out about a couple apology emails about lack of communication or double booking myself, because it was very overwhelming, not as a Black man, but a Black man in America, a Black man in Utah, and a Black man with a platform here locally.
Thank you for sharing that. And I want to make sure that I recognize the irony in me asking about your experience, about being tired, about people asking about your experience. Shawn, let's go to you. I was interested at what James said about being an introvert. I'm guessing you're not an introvert. Maybe you are a closeted introvert, but is your experience different from the one that James shared? What are your thoughts about this idea of racial battle fatigue? And you know, are you asked too little in the workplace? Are you asked too much in the workplace?
For me, I don't get asked anything about it in the workplace, and that's concerning to me. Especially when you look at our environment that we're in. You know, when we talk about racial battle fatigue, first I want to acknowledge Dr. William Smith, who is a leader in this space, and he's right there at the University of Utah. So he's a resource for anybody that's listening to this to go and learn about what this concept really involves. One of the things when we talk about this topic is that we have to acknowledge that many of us, you know, your panelists included, feel this every single day. like James said, we're raised in a way that we have a little different scope that our parents teach us. They teach us, first of all, that we have to work 10 times harder than anybody else just to be able to get a little piece of the pie. We have to know how to engage our communities. We have to change our language. We have to change our diction. We have to change the mannerisms in which we use every single day when we're amongst ourselves to be able to acclimate to our environment. Now, don't get me wrong, there's a difference between acclimation and assimilation. You know, we don't desire to truly be assimilated because we have to be ourselves, and we have a culture that we want to share and be generous with, but we want to be able to acclimate with equity. And, you know, I hear a lot of times in business that, you know, hey, why do you want to take what I have? We don't want what you have. We just want to be equals. We don't want any more or any less. We just want to share in this. So this burden of us having to figure out how to navigate this world in a way that is conducive to us continuing our growth, to being accepted, to being allowed to participate as an equal, is burdensome. And I mean, every day, and Emma and James can speak to this too, we're in this, we have another language. It's not a foreign language, but we have these codes that we have to live by. And we have to switch these codes depending on the conversation or the audience that we're amongst. And it's hard. But when you get home at night, you know, this is where the introvert comes in for me. I get home at night and my wife is ready to go. I'm in the chair trying to recover because I've been doing this all day long. And she doesn't really understand how this impacts me so negatively. But for us to be able to get rid of some of this burden, we have to have understanding from our other leaders in our community to be able to relinquish some of that burden from us by allowing the environments to be equitable. And that's probably the most I can say on that.
Shawn, you've introduced a really interesting topic, and I'll tell you, it's the first time I've considered this subject before. I think you used the term a different code, and you know, being able to move from one world to another, so to speak. I wish we had another hour just to talk about that, and I hope it's something that we can talk more about as we move forward with this initiative with the Utah Black Chamber and the Salt Lake Chamber, because I'm really interested in that. Emma, let's go to you, and feel free to, you can either talk more, share your thoughts about what Shawn mentioned, or racial battle fatigue, or anything else you want to. Take it away.
I think what Shawn and James, when I did this, is like, now, you know, that's a family secret. You're telling some cultural secrets here about code switching, but we know what that is. We know what that means. So how we walk into this space in regards to racial battle fatigue, like Shawn said, Dr. William Smith at the University of Utah has done intensive research on this. But when I walk into a space, I need to walk in knowing that I belong there, and how I use my voice, what my tone is, how I make eye contact drastically shifts when I am in a certain space. So if there are other Black individuals in that space, we know what we have just done. It is invisible to the others in the room, but we have learned to navigate spaces that expects us to not be at the highest level, as Shawn is saying, with his credentials. I have credentials. I am supposed to be here. I am the person that I am going to be doing the presentation of. So when you think about what racial battle fatigue is, it's not only that we are maintaining who we are and standing firm in our truth, but we're also at this higher level of walking into a space where other people do not believe we should be there. So it gets exhausting to do this. It gets exhausting, but the flip side is that I would rather be exhausted and educate you with correct information than for you to watch the television or read the newspaper or hear the radio station and get incorrect information. So if I am exhausted because I am helping educate you, I'd rather educate you correctly than for you to get the bias impressions, the perceptions from incorrect information or from incorrect individuals. So when we think about what we're talking about being able to be in a space where I am accepted for my 100% humanity. It's simple as that. 100% human being standing in front of you with the skills and the ability to have conversation, to lead in presentations, to provide correct information, to educate, to help your company be successful. We hire people who help us be successful. You've got 3 individuals on this panel right here who could take a company to a whole different level if given the opportunity, if given the factor that you trust what we say, that we have a PhD in this lived experience of Blackness. So when you think about this racial fatigue, it exists. I'm sure every culture has some type of fatigue. But when you look at where Black America has come, when we look at where we are now, and we're having this very same conversation that in 1965, when Dr. King was talking about this, we are still having this conversation in 2020, talking about equity, talking about validating an individual who is 100% human. So when you look at corporations as to what can they do, first of all, acknowledge our skills. We're on the same level as you. Acknowledge our skills and our ability to help you be successful and support our causes. Support our causes. Listen to what we are saying that needs to change internally with your organization. If there are exclusionary practices in there, Derek, if you walked into your space tomorrow and said to your employees, are there any exclusionary practices that we have within our organization? I guarantee you someone will say yes. I guarantee that. But if that question has never been put on the table, it is status quo. We're still doing business as usual, and I am invisible because my voice has not been validated. That's my 2 cents.
Well, it was more than 2 cents. Thank you for sharing it. I want to try to build off of something that you said, Emma, about, having the same conversation, because we are in a moment in time right now, but it needs to be more than just a moment. And I want to ask, I want to use this as the last question, and I'd love for each of the 3 of you to answer this in the time that we have left, which is far too short, unfortunately. But how do we make sure that it's not just a moment in time, but that it's a conversation that has real impact and lasting impact? So Emma, let's hear from you first, and then Shawn, and then we'll let James wrap it up for us.
I think one of the things that we have to do is look intentionally at who we are and what we say that we do. It's one thing to have a conversation, but if we're not going to implement sustainable change, we just had another conversation. So knowledge and awareness starts within. When we think about the organizations that we work with, Derek, if you walk into your place tomorrow, can you feel that it is a trusted, safe space, regardless of position or title? Can someone walk up to you and say, Derek, here's a concern that I have within our organization, and not for you to fix it. I have a solution, and I want to engage in conversation about the solution. If we do not have employees who can walk into their space, feel that their voice is heard and validated, that they are trusted, that they are valued, that they belong there, we are still doing what we did in 1965. So look around your space and see, is it a safe and trusted, authentic space? That would be my recommendation.
Thank you so much. Shawn.
Yeah, I hear a lot of companies saying that there's no talent here in the state of Utah, no minority talent here in the state of Utah. And James mentioned that there's a lot of talented people here. We just need opportunities, and we need opportunities to be authentic. We need opportunities to be willing to share and to teach and to learn. because in our business environment, there are certain things that you have to learn on the job. And you have to be just as willing to do that for somebody that doesn't look like you as you are for your nephew or your best friend or your neighbor that you hire. And we don't see that a lot of times in our environment here in business. So it's critical that we relinquish our hesitation to be able to share knowledge with those that are willing to learn. And for me, I think it's really critical that you accept me as who I am when I walk through the door. Don't expect me to be somebody else. Don't expect me to shift. You know, don't expect me to like all the things that you like. I don't expect that from you, but expect to enjoy me as my whole self and value me just as me, because that's where the growth and that's where the energy in relationships is going to come from. You don't want somebody that's exactly like you. You know, there's no fun in that. There's no joy in that. There's no understanding that of humanity in that. We want to be with people that are different. You know, we live in that environment every single day, and we found ways to really cherish the relationships we've had, and it's come over time. And I implore those that are employing people and businesses out there to start to learn to enjoy other people, to be willing to learn. There's so many great things that we can share that a lot of times you're missing out on if you're not opening up your mind and your heart. And it's real simple to do. It's a little hard work if you haven't done it before, but it's real simple. And the payoff is phenomenal.
Shawn, you made an important point about finding talent. And so I want to ask all three of you, is there best practice? What would you recommend for these business leaders that are watching today? How do they tap into the talent that we got?
The definition of insanity is you keep doing the same thing over and over again, you're going to get the same result. It's about as simple as I can really put it. You really have to do something different in order to discover diverse talent, because yes, we lack diversity here, but there are diamonds in the rough out here. Look at the two people beside me. I mean, I probably have a different Zoom screen than others, but I have Emma on my left and Shawn on my right, two dynamic individuals, you know, and there's more of us out there. So you have to expand your influence. And so if you're around 5 white people, well, then that's a problem. You got to expand your influence even more, find more people of color, and we go back to the first question. Don't just tokenize yourself. Don't find that one Black person or that one Asian person. Dive in to the communities to learn and get educated about the culture. There's so many organizations that serve the diverse communities. The minority chambers. There's other, you know, Miss Emma's part of the AFCAP Alpha sorority. There's Black sororities and fraternities, National Association of Black Accountants, National Society of Black Engineers, National Association of Black Journalists. I mean, there is so many different diverse organizations in the community. You just have to discover them. And, you know, and that's what the chamber is all about. We want to introduce you to these organizations and just really build that relationship. Utah is so great at connections. But that's where what we really have to learn how to do better is, in fact, connecting, because where we're at now is that the bridge is up. And so we're on one side of the water, and we're not talking to each other. Instead, we're just trying to shout our agenda across the water, and no one's really understanding it because we're in our own little environment thinking that ours is the best way. So going back to what Shawn was saying, we really have to be willing to learn. And in order to do that, you got to bring the bridge down, which means you have to listen to understand instead of listening to respond. And that's what I've been preaching over the whole month of June, is that in order to bring that bridge down, you have to be able to listen and understand what the needs are, understand what policies you may need to be adjusted within your organization. And as we start listening more, that bridge starts coming down more. And when you have that bridge, you have what's called common ground, where more solutions can start coming up. You know, because that's where the ideas come. Just like Shawn was saying, you have different perspectives and ideas coming in, but we can be respectful of everybody's ideas and thoughts. and experiences, and so we can talk on one common ground. That's where we can elevate to the next level within your company and within the state.
I really love what you said, James, about it all beginning with that listening, and particularly what you said about listening to understand, not necessarily listening just to respond. And James and I did a podcast a couple of weeks ago where the point was made that often, and especially in business, I think a lot of business leaders, when they see a quote unquote problem or challenge, they just think, okay, tell me what to do. You know, like it's a checklist. If you'll just tell me the 4 things to do, I can go through them. And what I hear you saying, James and Emma and Shawn, is this isn't just a checklist that you go through. It's got to begin with this conversation, and particularly begin with listening. So that is probably a good note to end this webinar on, but begin the conversation on. And so that serves as a reminder that I want to give to each of you that this is just the beginning of a conversation. Remind you about the initiative in partnership with the Utah Black Chamber and the Salt Lake Chamber, the Equality and Inclusion and Opportunity Initiative. Those of you who are interested in participating in continuing this conversation and continuing the listening and the learning, you can email policy@slchamber.com. We're already beginning to schedule these series of upcoming small group conversations. And I especially want to thank our panel members today, James Jackson III, who's the founder and executive director of the Utah Black Chamber, Emma Houston, training and development facilitator with Salt Lake County, and her specialty in human resources, and of course, Shawn Newell, who's the vice president of business development and industrial supply. Thanks to all of you, and thanks to everyone who participated.
Can I ask a quick question?
Absolutely.
So in the Q&A, there are a few questions in there. Is it a way that we can, James and Shawn and I can receive those and then we can respond and send them back to you? We just don't want to miss that opportunity to answer those questions.
Thank you for noting those. And I think we covered 1 or 2 of those questions, but the 2 that we didn't, we will do just that.
Great.
Thanks again, everyone. Look forward to speaking with you again soon, I hope.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks now.